Help us understand how that level of authority relates to an office in the church like elders. How does the congregation's authority and then the authority that elders have, how do those work together?
Well, elders are leaders. So the elders, it's clear, say in Acts 20 with the Ephesian church, or in just the qualifications for elders in 1 Timothy 3 or Titus 1, the elders or pastors, it's the same, they're used interchangeably, those words, have the responsibility to teach, to guide, but that's it. We're not the church. The church, the congregation is the church. Mm-hmm. So we teach and we guide, but the church has to follow. Mm. And the church can choose not to follow. And when we're wrong, the church should choose not to follow. Now, hopefully we're never wrong.
Right.
But you know what we're like as fallen creatures, even though we're redeemed, we are wrong sometimes. So in our congregation, I've been here 22 years, and I can only think of one time that a motion that was from me was voted down. And even then, it was because of a constitutional provision that required 75%, and we had like 66 or 70%.
When you say voted down, you mean voted down by the congregation?
That's right, at a members' meeting, a duly constituted members' meeting.
I think it's helpful. I've heard you use the illustration before, but I wondered if you could do it again in this setting when you talk about the congregation being the emergency brake on the decision-making process. I think that's a helpful.
Yeah, I think one of the bad ideas about the responsibility for the congregation is that people think the congregation as a whole needs to decide what bus we're going to buy,
right.
You know, what Xerox machine we're going to purchase.
Right. Color of the carpet, that kind of thing.
That's disasters, usually. Now, if you have a high degree of congregational unity, and if the elders or the deacons, the leaders in your church think it's wise, they can involve the congregation in those kind of things. You have to be very careful not to sort of use up the congregation's time for stuff that's really not the point.
Yeah.
The most important thing the congregation will do is take in members and see out members and recognize elders. So elect a new pastor or other pastors in the congregation. Those are really the chief things they're going to do in a matter of business.
Yeah. Because
what we do, we care for each other. And the way we care for each other is we let the elders do their leading, the teaching. So Hebrews 13 exhorts us to obey our leaders. That means the elders are the steering wheel of the church. The congregation doesn't steer. The congregation is more like the emergency brake. If the elders start to teach you like Peter did with the Galatians when he was sitting only with the Hebrew believers.
Right.
And Paul saw in that an undermining of the gospel. Even though Peter, in his case, had apostolic authority, Paul was instructing the congregations, don't follow anyone that teaches you something like that. So the congregations have that kind of responsibility. Another example is in 2 Timothy 4, when Paul is talking to Timothy, the pastor of the Ephesian church, and he says there's going to be a time coming when people won't endure sound teaching, but to suit their own passions, they will gather around them teachers to teach what their itching ears want to hear. Now, what's interesting there is he doesn't just blame the false teachers. Now, James 3:1 says teachers will be held accountable to a stricter judgment. So teachers like me, and I suppose you, we do have extra responsibility.
Right.
But also, the congregation that sits and listens to false teaching bears some of the responsibility for that false teaching.
Because they let it happen.
Let it happen.
Nobody spoke up.
They're sitting there listening. They're maybe paying for it. They're maybe just appearing to give approval to it. I, from time to time, will exhort my congregation to fire me. You know, if you really love me, fire me. If I start teaching you something that's seriously wrong. Now, I'm not talking about just a disagreement over important but secondary things like Israel. You know, well, that's not an unimportant issue, but it's not the gospel.
Right.
But if I start teaching you something false about the person of Christ or how we're saved or what it means to be saved, then you need to, out of your love for me, so I don't incur more judgment on myself from God before his judgment seat, you need to, in love, get rid of me. Just like Paul in Galatians 1:8, you know, said, look, if I or an angel from heaven, Moroni, should come and teach to you any other gospel than the one you've received, let him be accursed.